So far, there is no talk of boycotting either. But if the boycott attempt...
Last year, there were over 6 million victims of violent crime in the United States. Roughly 1 in 40 Americans was either raped, robbed, assaulted, or murdered. In large metropolitan areas, the figure can be as high as 1 out of 12.
They both had smiles on their faces, and one said, "Okay, this is a holdup. We've got a gun, and we're going to blow your fucking head off."
Rape isn't, you don't talk about it to a lot of people. You just try to forget it.
I feel the same anger, almost the same anger as I did that night.
A lot of the anger is because you know you can't get revenge. They get away with it. And you are left like this, afraid and angry and frustrated.
Strong feelings of anger and frustration are universal in the aftermath of a crime. Victims have become rapidly disillusioned with an overloaded court system that tends to disregard their needs and make it possible for criminals to plea bargain their way back onto the street. In some isolated cases, a victim's frustration has turned to violent revenge. Perhaps the most celebrated case is that of Bernard Goetz. On December 22nd, 1984, Goetz shot 4 black youths who allegedly attempted to mug him on a New York subway. For some, Goetz became an overnight hero, someone who finally fought back. But to others, Goetz was a frightening example of excessive violence in the name of self-defense. Yet even those who condemned his actions could understand the feelings of helplessness and fear.
Understand it, I feel it. We all do. All you have to do is have somebody close to you hurt or threatened even. If I just think about it, your own daughter, how do you feel? Your own father-in-law, your own wife, yourself, violated. I mean, to be reduced in dignity by some bum who comes up to you and threatens you with force. Of course there's indignation, of course there's anger. And those are the moments when sometimes you make a mistake.
March 16th, 1984. Jeffrey Paul Doucette is extradited from California to face charges of kidnapping and child molestation. In the Baton Rouge airport, 38-year-old Gary Plochet is apprehended seconds after executing Doucette. Gary Plochet is the father of the 12-year-old boy who had been abducted by Doucette. In a split second, a criminal became the victim, and the victim became the criminal. Plochet now faces the possibility of life in prison. If he does serve time, he won't be the first victim to be punished for taking revenge.
The day started early for Tony Simo before the lifestyle changes in prison. Tony Simo's been sentenced to 8 years for his part in the bombing death of Rudolph Tyner, who had been convicted of murdering Simo's mother and stepfather March 18th, 1978.
My first thoughts, whenever I saw him, is how could anybody take my mother and father's life, as good a people as they were.
Tyner was sentenced to die in the electric chair for the crime. Apparently, Simo didn't feel the sentence would be carried out, so he enlisted the aid of the state's most infamous prisoner, Pee Wee Gaskins.
With the help of death row inmate Pee Wee Gaskins, Simo was able to contract the murder of Tyner. On September 13th, 1982, Gaskins hit a bomb in a homemade radio which exploded in Tyner's face. Tony Simo was convicted of conspiracy and 2 lesser charges. But in his mind, justice had been served.
2 different juries in 2 different counties and 2 different judges sentenced him to be electrocuted as punishment for what he did to my mother and father. If they would have carried that out swiftly and appropriately, I'd have felt this thing never would have happened. I'd been satisfied. I felt like justice was done. And I feel like now that justice has been carried out.
So this chapter of Tony Simo's life comes to an end this Thursday when he reports in Columbia to serve 32 months in jail for what some may consider a crime and others consider vindication. In Horry County, Al Irvin, PD 15 News.
Tony Simo and Gary Plauché took the law in their own hands. And while it may be possible to understand their desire for vengeance, our society cannot condone such actions. There are other ways of getting even.
People can channel their anger in a constructive way in 2 ways. They can fight back in the system by making the system more accountable and making it more responsive to the victim. And that they can also fight back on a more private way with the victim assistance agencies, helping to cooperate with other victims, show other victims that you survive and you go on with your lives, get counseling, channel your anger into this type of behavior. I think there are 2 real constructive ways that victims can fight back, and I think they're starting to do it.
In New York City, many victims are turning to each other for help, gathering in counseling sessions to share their experiences.
Group is the more you can express yourself, the better you're going to feel.
One group is Crime Victims Counseling Services, started 4 years ago by psychologist Shelley Niederbach, a survivor of 2 muggings.
I'm going to ask you to read it aloud.
The participants come from a wide range of backgrounds. David Matz is a business executive. Karen McIntosh, a commercial artist. Lydia Smith is a housewife, and her husband Sam is in the construction business. In the first of 5 sessions, victims are asked to express in writing their fantasies of revenge.
If the perpetrator came into the room right now, I would grab one of the guns they had and put it right into the face of the man who struck me and terrified me. I'd like to scare him to death first, letting him wonder as I did if I was going to die or not. But after torturing him, I think I would pull the trigger.
Lydia and Sam Smith were robbed and beaten in their own apartment as their 4-year-old daughter looked on.
If I had a gun, I'm sure that I would probably shoot them.
The anger the Smiths feel is common to nearly all victims. For many years, they lived without incident in this quiet section of Brooklyn. But in January of 1981, 2 men with guns forced their way into the Smiths' apartment.
I saw this man coming at me, and when I screamed, he, hit me in the face and threw me into the wall. Then when I was sitting on the floor, he had a gun in my eye, and he was pulling my rings off my hands, and he was cursing. He said if he couldn't get the rings off, he would cut my fingers off.
They could take the whole apartment for all I cared. I was wondering what they were going to do with Lydia and my daughter. That was what I was really worried about. All kinds of things were going through my mind. Like, would they rape Lydia, of course? Would they abuse my daughter? And that's what was really bothering me.
He felt that there had to be something that he could have done to help us, and he was feeling guilty that he couldn't do anything. But going through with crime victims, he realized there was nothing he could do.
There is a tendency for victims to blame themselves for the crime. By talking with others, the Smiths were able to overcome that guilt, but they will always remember the terror they felt that night.
I still have nightmares. I cannot get into bed if the closet door is open. Any little sound that I hear, I still jump. Even though time makes it a little easier, you really don't forget.
All New Yorkers think they might be mugged. I still think I might be mugged. It's something that we just sort of live with. But I never thought I'd be raped.
When she was 21 years old, Karen McIntosh was raped in her own bedroom by a man who climbed in the bathroom window. Like many rape victims, she hid the crime from her family and friends. Only now, at the age of 30, has she begun to confront her emotions.
somewhere in the back of my mind, there's always a thing, well, you know, it happened 9 years ago. You should be over it by now. But I very rarely dealt directly with what had happened to me. I started being afraid of people. I started being afraid of men. I was afraid of lying in my bed. I couldn't afford to buy a new mattress. I couldn't afford to move. So it's just being totally out of control. I was able to send him to jail. It was only 5 years, but knowing that I was still living with the fear that I was marking every year. This is the anniversary of my rape. You know, it's the 3rd year. It's the 4th year. And I, for a long time, felt, you know, why didn't I fight back? I never saw the weapon. You know, he just did what he wanted. But I'm not feeling that way anymore. And I'm not feeling that way anymore.
So that part's gone away.
Talking with other victims, they had the same feelings, that they felt they could have prevented this crime, that they felt that they were responsible for this crime for any reason, for moving to New York, for just being there, for taking the subway. For me, it was for living in the Bronx, in a not-so-great neighborhood. Sharing that, just, it took away some of the pain, some of the guilt.
For Karen, crime victims was only the beginning. She now works for a rape counseling service, helping other victims overcome the same pain she suppressed for 9 years.
I never considered myself a victim. I'm over 6 feet. I'm in pretty good shape physically. And I became a victim quicker than I could blink an eye.
David Matz was mugged at gunpoint at a deserted subway station 3 years ago. Even though he escaped unharmed, he never forgot the image of a loaded gun held to his head.
After they took everything that they found valuable, they directed me to turn around, keep my eyes closed, and walk down the few remaining stairs to the platform. At that point in time, I was convinced they were going to shoot me in the back of the head. And with each step, I was waiting to hear the gunshot. And something deep inside me told me that my life would never be the same. And it hasn't been. My level of anxiety is higher now all the time than it was before this incident occurred. That's where the group was very helpful, because there were other men in the group who I identified with, and it was much easier to sort those feelings out and come to accept them. I want to go out there and hurt some of those people. I mean, really hurt them. It's like Lydia was talking about. She'd love to pull the trigger, but only before making sure that she saw the stark fear in their eyes, so they know what she went through. I want to put them through that, too. That's how angry I feel right now.
Even after 5 sessions with the group, David Matz still feels anxiety and paranoia when he travels alone after dark. But he now understands the irrational feelings that once dominated his life.
I think it's important for other men to know it's okay to be a victim of a crime. It's not your fault. You can feel feelings of guilt and shame. There's nothing wrong with those feelings. And it's important to talk about those feelings.
Let me talk to the man I just spoke with, okay? No, we'll send a medical unit out there to check you out. Okay? Now you wait right there. How about these guys? Were they white, black, Mexican? What race were they?
TF 42249. Units responding. There'll be 4 suspects that we're seeing going over the fence.
In Tucson, Arizona, a crime is committed every 15 minutes. For a city with a population of 500,000, it means that at least 96 people a day are added to America's list of crime victims. Unlike most cities, Tucson recognizes the plight of the victim. When police officers in Pima County are dispatched to the scene of a crime, They are often accompanied by the Crisis Intervention Unit of the Victim Witness Program.
What we know right now is that we've got some very intoxicated people.
You'd think every city would realize that with all the increase in crime and all the panic and the uproar about tougher laws, that people would realize, well, wait a minute, it's not just the criminals we need to get tough about. What do we do about those lost citizens who were the victims? And I feel like victim witness being there at the scene, we are their support system. Because basically, that's when they need somebody, right then and there when it's happening. Not 2 weeks later when you shuffle them into counseling, not 6 months later when you finally get them into court, but right then and there when it's still going on, when the panic's there, when the fear's there.
Sometimes the victim feels like nobody understands me. You know, I hear that so many times. You just don't understand. You just don't understand what I'm going through. You know, and then I see a chance where I know something has happened that happened to me too, and I can say, well, maybe I can share a little bit of what I've been through, and maybe you could say I do understand.
Be advised I do have HPO with me, but I'm going to have them hauled back from the scene just like everybody else.
The success of the Victim Witness Program lies with its volunteers. Many of them, like Carol DeLuca, have been victims themselves and can provide needed empathy and understanding in a moment of crisis.
Would it be helpful for us to talk to him, or should we just leave him alone?
Talk to him a little bit. Carol's frequent partner is Stuart Gelman. Their experiences together have taught them that no incident is routine.
You know what the circumstances were?
I don't know yet.
In this case, an elderly pedestrian has been struck by a car. While the unconscious victim is rushed to the hospital, Stuart and Carol are called upon to counsel and comfort the distraught motorist.
Pretty bad.
As far as family and stuff.
I'm Carol DeLuca. And this is Stuart.
I've seen you around.
Huh?
I've seen you around.
Yeah.
How are you doing, Mike?
I'm going to get on the other side.
Have you ever talked to a cop?
You can't minimize the pain that any victim has. And sometimes just being there on the scene is real valuable. And I have an enormous sense of empathy and understanding that I probably would have never had. I was a victim of incest, and the molestation started when I was 5. And when I was 7, my mother left home, and the actual intercourse started. I literally took the place of my mother as far as a sexual relationship with my father, raising my 2 younger brothers, and being a housekeeper. That continued till I was 14 years old. And my father was arrested, and he was sent to prison.
Incest has been called the hidden crime. Most cases are never reported because victims are too frightened and ashamed to share their ordeal. Carol DeLuca is 34 now, happily married and the mother of 3. But for 20 years, she struggled with the burden of her secret.
The hardest thing for me was forgiving, and that's the hardest thing anybody can do as a victim, is learning to forgive. And once you do that, that's when the real healing starts. Forgetting, you'll never forget. I'll never forget.
Carol's parents were married in August 1948. The groom was 23. His bride was only 14. After 5 years and 3 children, the marriage began to fall apart. When her mother walked out, Carol DeLuca's childhood turned into a nightmare.
I realized when you look at it psychologically what he was doing, taking out all the bitterness that he had against my mother on me. But still, it was devastating growing up. You know, life just wasn't important to me at times. I was so isolated. I had no one to turn to, and even if I wanted to turn to somebody, the thought that they would never believe me was a real fear. I had a hate-love relationship with my father. I hated what he was doing to me, but I loved him. I was continually called whore, bitch, you never amount to anything. And that's what I had to carry through my adulthood. You know, feeling I'm a whore, I'm a bitch, I'll never amount to anything. And that's pretty hard. Finally, I had to realize that I wasn't all those things, that I had something to offer, that I was a good person, and what happened to me wasn't my fault. I think the hardest thing was testifying against my father, with him in the room. And as a result of that, my father cut me off completely. He died in San Quentin prison 4 years later. So I never saw him again. I never went to his funeral or anything. He never wanted to see me. I received a letter from my aunt, his last letter that he wrote, and all he mentioned was his sons. Never mentioned he had a daughter.
After the death of her father and through the early years of her marriage, Carol tried to bury the past. She seemed a typical, well-adjusted housewife. But inside, the trauma continued to haunt her.
I always saw anger in a very violent way. And when I went through counseling, I realized that there was good anger and there was bad anger. And when I was told it was okay to be angry, I got angry. I got angry at my father. You know, how come you did this to me? And I did something that I normally don't share, but for me it was important because the only confrontation I had was to go to my father's gravesite. And I got angry. I literally tried to dig him up from the grave. But it was a frustration that I had to get out. And I must have been over his grave for at least 2 hours, just letting it all out, crying, digging, screaming, yelling, whatever I had to do. And then I just sat there, exhausted, looking around, making sure that nobody saw me, because they probably thought it was nuts. But it was a feeling that for the first time was a good feeling. I got angry for the first time, and it's okay. And this man is not going to control me anymore. And now there are actual times, and this is hard to say because some people, you know, find it very hard for me to even believe. But I miss him. I miss him as far as a father. But I think if he was alive today, he would never be able to hurt me. So I learned to forgive, and that's the hardest part, is just learning to forgive. And if you can do that, you're halfway home.
10-4, I'm over on East Los Cienega on Tucson Boulevard regarding a domestic dispute. They're having some psychological and emotional type problems.
I'm taking something really negative and turning it into something positive. And I believe in that. I could very easily sit here and feel very sorry for myself. You know, I've gone through hell. But I'm not going to let my father or my past control me like he did for so many years. I couldn't fight back then. I was just a child. But I can fight back now. And that's what I continue to do.
They're willing to sit down to a mediation session. If you can make your way over here, I think it'd be very helpful and important for them.
I'm Floyd Hefner, age 47. That morning is a strange feeling. 10:30, I looked at my assistant, and I told him something is wrong. Little did I know
no one should have to go through things like this. So pleasant. Especially with two small children.
For nearly 11 years, Floyd Hefner and his family enjoyed a typical suburban lifestyle. But on the morning of February the 8th, 1983, their lives were abruptly shattered. It started with a knock on the door. Waiting on the front steps was the next-door neighbor, a young man with a high-powered rifle. When Joyce Hefner answered the door, he suddenly opened fire. She yelled to her 5-year-old daughter, Jenny, who had been standing at the top of the stairs, to run. Joyce then collapsed on the kitchen floor, where she was fatally wounded by a shot to the head. The assailant then pursued Jenny, who had hidden in her closet. He fired through the bedroom door and left the house thinking he had killed her. The bullet narrowly missed Jenny, who then dialed 911 and reported the incident.
County emergency. My mom's dead. What's your address? It's 9. I don't know my address. Who's around the house with? Who else is in the house with you? I don't know. There's my mother, and she's dead. Where's your mommy located at? In the kitchen. Where is she at in the kitchen? She's on the floor by the kitchen door. She's on the floor by the kitchen door? Yeah. Okay, hold on.
Police dispatchers kept Jenny on the phone for over 20 minutes while they traced the call. When officers finally arrived at the house, Joyce Hefner was already dead. It was then that Jenny first recounted how the next-door neighbor, 16-year-old Donald Young, had shot and killed her mother. He was arrested 18 hours later with 2 rifles and 20 rounds of ammunition in his possession.
February 1983, Joyce Hefner was found shot to death in her home. Her next-door neighbor, 16-year-old Donald Young, was charged with the murder. He was a loner, a high school dropout, and a Nazi sympathizer. He testified that Mrs. Hefner had laughed at him. This week, the court released a tape recording of the phone call 5-year-old Virginia Hefner made asking for help. 8 times she asked if the ambulance was on the way, but the police were having trouble locating the address because the phone number was unlisted.
I mean, this is an ambulance being here. How many more minutes? I don't know, but they'll be there very shortly.
Virginia's father, Floyd Hefner.
We want to take and get a copy of the tape. We want to keep it. So when Jenny gets older, that she does not have this inner feeling, maybe I should have done more.
They'll see my mother laying on the floor. Okay. Because my mother hasn't died before.
Donald Young was tried as an adult and sentenced to serve 145 years in prison. But under present Maryland law, he will be eligible for parole when he turns 41.
The thing that burns me up more than anything else is that I've lost a wife, and why doesn't the state come to us and say, hey, this is what we can do for you and your family? But yet I have to still pay taxes to keep this young man behind bars. And I feel that it is not right.
In the last year, Floyd Hefner has spent over $15,000 in psychiatric care and housekeepers for his children. The financial strain has forced him to file a lawsuit against Donald Young's parents, demanding compensation for their son's actions.
I'm not sitting back and letting them get away with it. And if I can get a swat back at them, it'll be my revenge of them because their son killed my wife.
The responsibilities of being a single parent have left Floyd Hefner with little time for himself. Working 14 hours a day as a project superintendent, he must leave his children in the care of a full-time housekeeper. Every morning they have breakfast in the very kitchen where their mother was killed.
Well, you're not eating breakfast, are you? Yeah. Our relationship together is probably drawn very close, but it's very difficult for them, especially for Jenny, because she doesn't want to talk about anything.
No way, is it?
At times it's difficult trying to maintain the household and the children, as well as keep your job.
Watch yourself, Jen.
It's lonely for them. This is our third housekeeper in nearly a year. And Jenny has made comments. Why does these people come and why do they leave us?
Slow down. Don't be silly.
If you could only have the answers, it would be a big help. When there's two of you, it seems like the load is a lot easier. This way, you do everything yourself. You pay all the bills in the home. You're doing the grocery buying. You are absolutely doing everything that came down the pike. There's a lot of things I have yet to this date had enough time really to sit down and have a good cry. It's because I've been very busy doing a lot of things. And I protect myself that I don't go into a very deep depression. And the doctors, of course, tells me that I'm due for one. I'm not going to let it happen if I can help it. And I think you have to be a very strong person to be able to go through all of this. There's a difference of probably 60 feet between the two homes. And everyone says, well, why don't you move? I feel that I shouldn't be the one to uproot. And the hardest part of the whole thing is that the family has never sent a card or even put a note between the doors saying, we are sorry. I guess you have to learn to cope with it. And a lot of things go through your mind. We've been married for 10 years, 5 months, 6 days. And we have memories that will go on for years. And when Brian and Jenny asked for a new mommy, they don't know how close their mother and I we were. A child 6 or 9 years old does not realize you just don't go out and find a new mommy now. It's not like a Santa Claus bringing you somebody. It takes time. They cannot understand this. And of course their little minds are wondering, what is Daddy doing for us, I'm sure. Because they want somebody to be able to sit and talk to them instead of a housekeeper.
One more time and I have to go to work, okay? All right, that's enough.
They don't quite understand the full meaning of death as I look at it.
Well, I'm trying to give you guys a kiss so I can go to work.
There's probably a lot of questions going through their mind. What is it all about? They are really concerned what's going to happen next. And if something would happen to me, who do they call to give them the information that Daddy's gone? I love you, honey.
Dad says that we're going to start all over again, so I said, well, if we move, we can then start all over again in a new house. So, I don't know.
You don't think you can start over again here, though, huh?
Mm-mm.
Why?
Next door neighbors.
The neighbor had a son who committed a crime, who has killed a human being. And I guess if you would fight it hard enough, you'd be able to take everything that they have. And it's not for me, it's for Jenny and Brian. I feel that they owe it to them. And that is the reason why I'm fighting. It's the reason why I'm going to Annapolis tonight. I owe it to my family.
You have just heard testimony in behalf of those whose voices can no longer be heard. The Stephanie Roper Committee speaks for them and the basic rights that were denied them. The right to lead free, productive lives. The right to
Shortly after his wife's death, Floyd Hefner joined this victims' action group. Sharing his tragedy with other victims made him realize that he was not alone in his feelings. One story in particular was the catalyst for this gathering, and it was one that the Maryland State Legislature would find hard to ignore. The story involved the murder of a young woman.
If I had to choose one word to describe Stephanie, it would be sunshine. She was everything beautiful, caring, intelligent, gifted that is known in this world. She had a sister and 3 brothers, and Stephanie used to tell me about how her friends made admiring remarks about us and the closeness that we had, and that's what I remember. The last time I saw Stephanie, she was going out the garage, and I went out with her, and the last thing she said to me were, "Do these socks look okay, Mom?" And I said, "Sure, you know, they're fine." And she said, "I really have to clean up this car tomorrow," because she had piled in a bunch of her stuff from school. And I said, "Have a good time, have fun, and give me a call if you're going to be later than I expect you." And she said, "Goodbye."
My relationship with Stephanie as a father was a little different. She was my best girl, all that sort of thing, but to her mom, she was a real friend, and her other side, she could see all the things that she wanted to do and to become as an artist and a gifted person were reflected in Steph, and all that was crunched just in a moment, and it's hard to take.
In the early morning hours of April 3rd, 1982, Stephanie Roper left a friend's house and never completed the 20-minute drive home. The next day, police found her abandoned car along an isolated country road and assigned the case to the Missing Persons Bureau under the strong suspicion that Stephanie was just another runaway.
It was so untypical of Stephanie. I felt I had been disemboweled without anesthesia. I just felt like I was living dead. I had to be there. I couldn't sit still. I was waiting for Vince to come home. I felt helpless, and I couldn't stay at home. I had to be where it had all happened. And as soon as we could, we went out there, and...
The Ropers accompanied police to the site of the abandoned car, but found no trace of their daughter. The search continued for 1 week before the details of her disappearance were pieced together by investigators. That Saturday night, as she drove home, Stephanie had trouble with her car. 2 young men came upon the scene and offered to take her home. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would last for the next 5 hours. She was driven south 35 miles to St. Mary's County and repeatedly raped in the back seat. Their destination was this abandoned shack in one of the most secluded parts of Maryland. She was dragged along this hallway by her abductors, Jack Jones, age 26, and Jerry Beatty, age 16, and again raped 4 more times in this room. Finally, at sunrise, Stephanie overheard Jones and Beatty discussing that she must not be a witness to their crimes and should be silenced permanently. Realizing their intentions, she jumped through this opening and tried to escape into the woods. Jones caught up to her, beat her with a logging chain, and finally shot her in the forehead with a .22 caliber rifle. They doused Stephanie with gasoline and set her afire. She was barely 22 years old.
I don't think there has been an hour or two of any given day that I have not replayed the events of that night without thinking about the cold terror that Steffi experienced. It's like a nonstop videotape.
On Easter Sunday, 1 week after her abduction, investigators found Stephanie's charred remains in a ditch near the abandoned shack. The same day, police went to a secluded house less than 400 yards from the murder site and arrested Jack Jones, an unemployed pool hustler, and Jerry Beatty, a 16-year-old runaway who was living with Jones and his wife. Their quick arrest came as the result of a tip given to police by Jones's brother-in-law, who had heard Beatty bragging about the crime. The evidence against them was substantial, and eventually both made full confessions. They were convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and rape, and sentenced to serve 2 life terms plus 30 years, concurrently, meaning that Beatty and Jones could be paroled in less than 12 years.
Life for Jack Jones meant 11 years and 7 months. We left the courtroom with the friends who had accompanied us for 6 weeks and our sons. We left there stunned, betrayed, and we came home and we faced our children, and they asked us why this had happened. They had seen Steffi's life given less value than someone's property. And we didn't have any answers for them. But we told them that we would try to find some answers, that we could not continue to ask them to believe in and obey and defend the laws that had allowed this to happen.
The public outcry generated by the light sentences imposed on Jones and Beatty prompted the Ropers to fight back.
John, I think we got everything down here so we can all come
They formed the Stephanie Roper Committee and began by distributing petitions and gathering signatures aimed at changing Maryland's laws. They took as their slogan an entry from Stephanie's diary: "One person can make a difference, and every person should try."
Hi, I wonder if I might tell you about the Stephanie Roper Committee. I don't know if you've heard about us, but we're working to strengthen Maryland's sentencing laws and provide equal rights for victims.
Concerning the Stephanie Roper Committee.
Do you know about our rally on the 16th?
Yes, in Annapolis.
Yes, right. Yes. So if you're able to at all, please come and bring your friends, fill a car, or we're also providing bus transportation from several locations. So if you call our office, we'd be happy to sign you up for that too.
Okay.
It's harder today than it was 21 months ago because this is the reality of forever. There were times during the trial and after our daughter's murder that I thought, I wish he had killed me because half of me is dead. I will never be the same. And we resolved that we would have to do something to make something good and positive come out of our experiences and our senseless tragedy.
We have a couple of small items then, beginning
The Stephanie Roper Committee has become one of the most effective voices for victims' rights in the country.
telling them that last year was the largest rally in history in Annapolis.
One of their most effective tactics for change has been to maintain a high profile at criminal trials, making the judge and jury constantly aware of the victims. They call it court watching.
We didn't realize the court watch was going to be as successful as it has been, and has been successful, and all we have to do is organize it. It'll operate by itself, and we've got a perfect person to direct it, and she's skillful at it, and it's probably going to be one of the long-term projects this committee does.
The state statistics that just came out, the police said crime was down statewide, something like 12%, and violent crime in our area down 10%.
We wonder why.
The head of the police said he attributed to judges responding to citizens, activist groups.
Right. Is that what
That's us. Too many victims learn that their efforts are not going to produce results. They're not willing to go through the pain and anguish alone, perhaps, and fighting and knowing that they may be repeatedly victimized by the system, by the media, or whoever. Each of us has choices in life, and if we don't choose to do something about it and we remain silent, that means we accept the current situation, and we cannot do that. Having to do this has completely altered our lifestyle. We don't have many free moments. You have to come to terms with the fact that you're never going to be the person you were before, I would have never pictured myself in this role, doing what I'm doing, and I wish no one had ever heard of the Roper family or the Stephanie Roper Committee. There really shouldn't be any need for us.
Victims of violent crime do not seek revenge. They seek to be healed. Justice is the healer. Justice is what we can live with after we have been violated. The plight of the victim is largely overlooked by the significant fact that the criminal defendant is visible, vocal, and most importantly, alive. The murder victim has been forever silenced. That is why we feel tonight it is very important for you to recognize the families that have gathered on these steps. The pictures that they hold are not nameless faces. They are cherished loved ones. Their families' lives have been forever changed. The Stephanie Roper Committee has had a significant beginning in correcting the flaws in the judicial system. But we have only begun.
This whole thing, it's started from a group around a kitchen table to this grassroots organization we have now, and the momentum has just grown day by day. It's like dropping a pebble in a pond. It's not just one person, it's this murder. It affects all those around them. I'm an old runner from way back, and I've never quit a race, and I'm not quitting this one either. You've got to finish. I think this is a long-term thing, and I think it certainly has changed all of us. Some children have had counseling, we've had counseling, and it's an ongoing thing.
That's right. It's not going to change anything for us. But if we can prevent another family and another group of citizens to...
I don't know how Roberta does it. She's still a mother and a teacher, and she does all these things very well and still finds the time to do all the speaking.
We don't advocate the death penalty, but we advocate laws.
But it takes a toll on the family, and you just don't do all the things you used to do. So we try to really make an effort as a family to do things together.
All the things that we did together as a family, they're especially hard. We're always aware that someone's missing. The Roper family has suffered their nuclear holocaust. We feel like nothing can ever inflict the irreparable damage to our lives as this event has done. Yet at the same time I say this, I know that I must steel myself and relate the events of that night and perhaps suffer the consequences of being called cold and clinical. And I don't know that it will ever get easier. You learn that you have to find ways to deal with it on an individual basis because even those you love find it extremely painful to talk about the feelings and emotions that we've all experienced.
Here, Buffy. Buffy, here, girl, come on. Come on.
And if I have to, I come home and I go outside in the woods where no one can hear me and I scream or cry alone and face the world and don't tell them how I really am.
Oh, you're a good girl. Come here, come here, come here. Come on. Come here. Where's the girl? Come on. Come on.
Great, you got the pad. Okay, now let's go on. You know, you go.
Steffi would almost be 24 now. She was my best friend. I believe I was hers. And when she died, a part of me died. She would be into her career. She displayed a great deal of talent and gutsiness and intelligence and everything that one would need to succeed in their chosen field. And that's one of the hard things to accept. Parents don't bury children. It's the other way around, and this is all wrong. It shouldn't be happening to me. I shouldn't have to do this. And I look at young people her age and say, why Steph? Why our family?